thank everyone for joining us today. And I want to thank our panelists for joining us. So let's get started. I just want to introduce each of our panelists today. We have Steffanie Stelnick with the Law Office of Steffanie Stelnick. We have co-founder and CEO TJ Coveyou with Arch Loans. And we have Steve Manzo with Orange Coast Title. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. Just as a recap, today's topic is impacts of legislation and COVID-19 on the evictions and foreclosures. As a reminder, at the end of, towards the end of the meeting, we will open up to a Q&A. We had several questions sent in, and we've selected a few that I hope we can get to that I think will be very, very informative, and they're also very close to the topic as well. And just as our audience, as an announcement for the audience, the setup to this webinar, your microphone and your audio will be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you do have any questions from any of the content that that we come across here, I will send out a follow-up email after this event with contact info for each of our speakers so that you can get in touch with them. Okay, so let's get started. TJ, let's go ahead and have TJ. He has a quick message that he'd like to share with the group, and then we'll get started. Go ahead, TJ. Oh, let's unmute his audio. Okay, we're ready.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm really glad everybody's attending, and I'm grateful for the community and the connections that we built here over the last 10 years or so. It's amazing to think that it's been 10 years, and I certainly hope that this is a medium that will allow us to continue to stay connected. I also want to thank Mike for putting this together. It's not as easy as it seems. And I want to thank Steffanie and Steve for their time. I'm looking forward to some great content, and it's really great to have them here. I really only have two things I want to say before we get started. First, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge that we've all been facing a lot of uncertainty in the last couple of months. And I want to assure everyone that Arch Loans, at least, has been available and will be available for you when you find those distressed deals that you need financing for. We're able to do this because we're capitalized with long-term private capital, and we don't sell our loans. We don't depend on Wall Street for our liquidity. So shocks like this don't affect us, and we continue to stay strong. The other thing I want to say is due to market volatility, the public markets, I've gotten a lot of questions from people. How do I invest my retirement money? How do I maybe buy a piece of Arch Loans? And I'm pleased to announce that the board has just recently authorized the sale of more shares in our parent company. And those shares can be purchased by an IRA or another retirement plan or by an individual. So we'll be sending a press release out on that in the next couple of days. But that's very exciting because I've just gotten a lot of inquiries from people on that. With that, I just hope everyone gets some value, or each person gets some value out of this. I know your time is important, and I hope you get some value out of it. I hope to see you maybe later in the session during the Q&A, or possibly on our next webinar that we'll be planning shortly. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Mike. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, TJ. Up next, Steve has a few updates. Go ahead, Steve. Take it away. Let's make sure your mic is on. Can you unmute it? 1 second, Steve.
Okay, we're all good?
There we go. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. And also a big thanks to both TJ and Mike for putting this on. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Steve Manzo. I've been in the business for over 30 years. So I have a little bit of experience with helping you get those transactions closed. I just wanted to go over a few main things that makes Orange Coast Title and myself a little bit more unique than other title companies out there. My assistant, Aida Rodriguez, has been with me for over 5 years. She's been in the business for 35. She is basically a junior title officer. So one of the things that we do for you as clients is we don't just do your basic property profiles. We'll also give you a lot of the back end information, which you would see in a preliminary title report. So you might have state or federal tax liens. You might have a lis pendens that's going on, bankruptcy, HERO programs, the solar issues. These are things that we're going to give to you up front so that you have that information to make sure that when you're going on a listing appointment or purchasing a property, you have all the information you need without any surprises. One of the other things that we do have available is we've got our own our online property profiles, which of course will give you basic information as far as property characteristics, your comps, aerial maps, as well as a little property history. And then one of the other things that's very unique is we have a buyer-seller app, which will help you to determine somebody's bottom line of what they're going to walk away with, or it'll also help you out with any buyers that you may have and help them with figuring out what their payment would be on a property. One of the other things that I've been able to do that I don't know if anybody else has available is that I do a lot of custom marketing. So what I mean by that is we get information from several different websites. Let's say, for instance, you want to find out people that have 100% equity. Not only am I going to give you their information and get a hold of them, but we now have phone numbers and emails that we can help provide to you. Because with this situation that we're in, you can't go knocking on the door. Mailers get very expensive. However, phone calls and emailing are a great way of being able to get in contact with those people for virtually no money. So like Mike mentioned, you're going to get all our contact information. We will follow up with an email, and anybody who's interested in any of those products, I'd be more than happy to get you set up. So thank you for attending, and I know you're going to get a lot of great information out of everybody. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. Appreciate that information. So without further ado, very excited for Steffanie Stelnick. The information that she has for us, I think, is going to be a strong value to the group. So without further ado, Steffanie, take it away.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Steffanie Stelnick, and I am a real estate attorney throughout the state of California. So I know a hot topic going on with everyone, and I hope you guys are all staying safe with COVID, is evictions. I do want to cover the current state of evictions with the state of California. I also want to go into different specific cities of Los Angeles with that rent more, and then also go into detail about COVID moratorium. So I actually prepared a PowerPoint, so I'm going to start sharing with you guys right now. So it'll pop up right now. Okay. So buying and selling properties in the state of California, but in reality, we're really discussing all different types of evictions. So as most of you guys should know, or you do know, on January 1, AB 1482 was passed by the state of California, which created that the entire state of California had a rent control ordinance. Now, there are certain exemptions, such as single-family residences are exempt unless they are owned by a corporation. They can be owned by a limited liability corporation, but if the entity that owns that LLC is not an individual, not a trust, and is owned by a corporation, then that is no longer exempt. Housing that has been issued a certificate of occupancy within the 15 previous years. Duplex where the owner occupies one of the units as the owner's principal residence is exempt. And from now on all leases, a tenant must be served with a car rent cap and just cause addendum, notifying the tenant that the property is exempt from this type of rent control until the notice of exemption is received. So if the tenant has not received from January 1 until now a notice that the property is exempt, they are subject to state rent control. The good news is it's not grandfathered in, which means you can serve it today and proceed with whatever the landlord wants to do. Or when you're buying the property, you can have it served during escrow so that you can proceed accordingly to try to get the tenants out before you close escrow. Now, if the city has stricter guidelines, then the state rules will not apply. It'll be the city. And so that's why the next slide is going to detail more for everybody what a just cause eviction and what a non-cause eviction is allowed or not allowed under the state ordinance, as well as the city of Los Angeles. So if you own a rental property in the city of Los Angeles, it may be subject to the city's rent stabilization ordinance. Now, I'm talking about the city of Los Angeles because a lot of investors love to buy properties in the city of Los Angeles. So you need to be aware of the rent control that you guys are subjecting yourself to and how much money you have to put into your buy price so that you guys are not held and having to come out a lot more money, and then you guys are not hitting your mark and having to not cover your costs. So the city of Los Angeles rent stabilization ordinance applies to anything that was built on or before October 1st, 1978, as well as replacement units. So most of the properties in the city of Los Angeles are rent control. There is a city of Los Angeles website called Zymus that you guys can check. You put in the address and it'll let you know if it has an RSO or it does not. But their single family residences are not subject to the city of Los Angeles rent control, but they will be subject to AB 1482, the state rent control, unless the tenant has received an exemption notice. Apartments, duplexes, 2 or more single dwellings, rooms in a hotel are not part of the rent control as well. So these legal reasons for evictions, and I don't want to go too fast so you guys can take notes in regards to what the at fault eviction and a no fault eviction is, because this is what's key for the AB 1482 as well, which is the state rent control. But a lot of investors try to use what's called the Ellis Act, which is you take it over, you serve the notice to terminate, but that requires you to go through the city. You as investors want to try to avoid going through the city at all costs, because if you go through the Ellis Act, then you have to take the rental property off the market for 2 years. So you have to factor into your costs what it would be if you had gone through the Ellis Act, add a little bit more, try to build a relationship with the tenants to try to get them out for a cash for keys agreement so you can avoid it. But hypothetically, if you have to go through the Ellis Act, you go through the Ellis Act. A lot of commercial developers are doing this by buying the entire and changing the use of the property in commercial properties, but that's for a different day, not today. So we're not going to go through that. Failure. So obviously an at-fault eviction is failure to pay rent, violation of the rental agreement or lease, like a 3-day notice to perform. Say a person has a dog on the property and it's not in the lease. That is a violation of the rental agreement. They have 3 days to get rid of the dog or get it approved by the landlord, or else it's considered an at-fault eviction. Unreasonable interference with the comfort, safety, or enjoyment of tenants or damages to the rental unit or the property. Using the rental unit or the common areas for illegal activity. Refusal to renew a lease or rental agreement of like terms and conditions. Refusing the landlord access to the rental unit, and at the end of the lease term, the landlord discovers the tenant is not the one who initially rented the unit and didn't approve of this person, then that's an at-fault eviction. And the tenant failed to temporarily relocate or honor a permanent relocation agreement as required per the tenant habitability plan. So that's like the Ellis Act. So say a tenant, you do everything you're required to do, give them the 60-day notice, they fail to vacate, then you can proceed with an at-fault eviction. Now, I want to harp on a lot of these because this is going to help us to go more into what's going on with COVID. As long you guys have to start understanding this, because this is when we go back to normal, which we don't know when that will be. But at this point in time, the at-fault evictions are stayed as a result of COVID for the time being. The relocation assistance information, I want to go over a little bit because it goes for AB 1482. Which is a lot less than like the city of Los Angeles, but AB 1482 requires 1 month of rent as a relocation payment. So if the tenant is renting at $2,000, the relocation amount is $2,000. You'll see on the next slide the extreme difference between the state ordinance and the city ordinances. And once again, you have to make sure that you, every city that you go in, like Oakland has their own rent control. That's a lot stricter than the state. So that'll be what takes the precedence in regards to eviction. Same thing with San Francisco, same thing with Richmond. So Santa Monica has a rent control, Pasadena has a rent control. You just have to look up the different ordinances in different cities to find out what the relocation amount is. So per the state ordinance, you can terminate the tenancy with proper notice, but you must put the 1 month of rent relocation and give it to the tenant within 15 days of that termination of notice. So they need to receive that money before they relocate. And if they don't relocate, that's when it becomes an fault eviction. So there's 3 different determinations of the relocation assistance for City of Los Angeles. There's the qualified tenant, which is any tenant who is on the notice at 62 years or older, handicapped, as defined by the state of California, Title 42, and any minor children. So if you have 15 people in a unit, one person is under the age of 18 or one person is over the age of 62, they are deemed to be a qualified tenant. If they're an eligible tenant, which is what you want, which is the age range of 18 to 61, but not handicapped, they are only entitled to a lot lower of an amount for relocation. And then there's low income tenants as well that are determined by their monthly income. So the amounts that are due up until June 30th, 2020 for relocation of eligible tenants, you'll see tenants with less than 3 years, they are owed $8,500 to relocate under the Ellis Act. With more than 3 years, they're owed $11,150, and income below, which is the low income, which I'll show you on the next slide, they're owed $11,150. So as you'll see, the qualified tenant, the tenants with less than 3 years are $17,950. Tenants with more than 3 years are $21,200, and same with low income. Now, I want you guys to understand these numbers so it helps you with coming up with a cash for keys agreement and your buy price, so you can factor in this amount. My advice to investors when they're purchasing these type of properties with the rent control is to at least factor in about 25 grand per unit to offer these tenants as cash for key in order to avoid the Ellis Act. The amounts on this slide is what the City of Los Angeles requires for the City of Los Angeles requires for the Ellis Act, and that's if you go through the correct channels. But once again, I advise you not to, because then you have to take the rental unit off the market for 2 years. But if it's going to take you 2 years to rehab it, it might be worth it, but it's just something you have to think about and weigh your options for. In regards to the state, once again, it's only 1 month of rent, but with what's going on with COVID, you kind of have to factor in like 3 times that amount to try to get a cash for keys agreement. So if it's $2,000, you got to factor in trying to offer the tenant $6 grand as a cash for keys to avoid trying to take them and get rid of them through an eviction. These are just the HUD low income limits for Los Angeles. So I'm just putting it out there. So when they're determined to be a low income family, just so you guys have that access and know it now. If you do go through the cities, you have to pay, the fees must be paid to the cities to go through the Ellis Act. And any type of relocation program goes through the city, there's fees to the city. And that's why I'm trying to tell you guys, it's better for you to avoid going through the city if you can. If you can't, this is just the next proceeds and next process. So with the state, the payment is required 15 days after notice. For cities, they differ. For the City of Los Angeles, it's due within, you have to put it into an escrow account within 10 days of the notice of move out, so they have access to it, but they are not allowed to receive it until they actually vacate the property. And if they do not vacate the property, you can use the amount that you've set aside for relocation to evict them. So now COVID-19 evictions and foreclosures. So unfortunately, although the governor allowed evictions, but for anything that had to do with COVID, the Judicial Council has banned all evictions up until 3 months from when the stay-at-home order is lifted. So Governor Newsom last week just extended that till the end of July, which means there will not be an eviction allowed in the state of California for 3 months from August 1st. So you're looking at October 1st for the earliest date to start an eviction. Now, that doesn't mean you can't serve your 60-day notices now. That doesn't mean you can't serve your 30-day notices and hope that these tenants move accordingly. But if they don't, you have to understand there is no court intervention for at least 4 months. And that's an extensive amount of time. And we don't know. And all I can tell you is today the House just passed the HEROES Act, which might make it a federal law to extend the eviction moratorium for 12 months. So it's still unknown what's going on, and then whether or not the states are going to adopt it. It still has to go to the Senate. It still has to go to the president. Once again, you can still serve tenants notices to terminate relationships. You can serve tenants notices to terminate at fault. The only evictions that the state is allowing is for health and safety reasons. So if your tenant or there's a huge leak, they started a fire, you can go in an emergency hearing to try to get them evicted. For COVID, if you are currently a landlord as an investor, they have to give you notice that they are unable to pay as a result of suffering from a COVID-related financial or medical reason. And then they also have to show you proof that they do or cannot financially pay for the rent, or that they're suffering a medical condition as a result of COVID. But they also just amended in the County of Los Angeles that you can sign a verification, the tenant can sign a verification just stating they can't pay rent. Now, once again, the state of California has extended this rent moratorium till the end of July 30th for the entire state. So they don't have to pay rent, but each county is taking it a little different. So LA County is allowing the rent moratorium to extend till July, but giving renters up until a year to pay their rent back. But then different cities are taking it different times. So my advice to you investors, if you guys are landlords and current landlords, is to find out what's going on in your certain county and state and city. With the eviction rule goes the consumer foreclosure rule. So once again, I say consumer foreclosures, which is like your standard mortgage. Do I have a question? So TJ's asking me, if you negotiate a mitigated rent in the short term, do you waive your right to evict later? No, you do not waive your right, because it's, oh, you're asking, do you want me to answer this with the group? Okay, so you do not waive your right to evict later, but you can still evict. So it's like you kind of have like two different leases now. So you have the rent moratorium, but the current lease is still takes precedence. So the tenant still has to uphold the current lease, but for the time period from April 1st until the end of July, that rent is kind of separated. So you come up with a payment plan or an agreement that can be upheld, but if they kind of breach that agreement, then that's a civil lawsuit. It has nothing to do with the eviction. You can only evict on the presiding contract. So if they have a dog, they're not supposed to have a dog. They have more people in the house than authorized. They have any type of breach of the current lease, you can start that eviction separately. In regards, so like I was talking about before, evictions and foreclosures are going hand in hand, unfortunately, right now with the state, the governor's new rent moratorium and foreclosure moratorium. So the foreclosures can't start until consumer foreclosures, like your Bank of America's, your Wells Fargo, not your hard money lenders. They have a different type of guidance. But they cannot start foreclosure proceedings for 3 months, 90 days after the rent moratorium stay-at-home order is lifted. So you're not going to start seeing foreclosures until after October 1st at the earliest, unless we start shutting down again. And once again, that's for the stay-at-home order to lift. That's the main order that's set by the Governor Newsom. Now, Governor Newsom's rent moratorium and foreclosures was a lot easier and better for the state, but the Judicial Council took it a step further by extending this 90 days after the stay-at-home order. So this is a Judicial Council rule, this is the courts making this decision. They will not issue a summons, which allows me to serve the tenant for 90 days. So we can file evictions all we want. I can file 100 a day. I cannot get them served to the tenant to start it. And the last point on here is the HEROES Act may extend it for 12 months. And this is going to be the same for consumer foreclosures. So we have a lot of unknown right now with the COVID-19. The key to still purchasing tenant occupied properties for you investors is to negotiate cash for keys with these tenants. You have to factor in, I can tell you that I talked to BASA, which is the biggest attorney for tenants, and they're the worst attorney for tenants, which means they're very good for tenants. Lancaster is $6,000 for cash for keys. They're not even entitled to that much money, but you got to factor in, if you want a cash for keys agreement and you want a tenant out before even starting an eviction, $6,000. So these tenants, if you can build a rapport with them before and build a relationship with them before to try to see where their status is, and if you can give them cash, it'll work out and be for your benefit. And I would do that during escrow. These landlords, you have to remember, are definitely, you find them in a need to sell their property. They probably haven't received rent since April 1st. And there is no telling when these people are going to receive rent again until we can figure out what's going on with COVID, unfortunately. And so that's kind of what I have so far just on the eviction stuff. So I guess we can take questions, Mike?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Steffanie. This is great stuff. I think probably have to host this once a week for the updates that continuously, yeah, you'll love that, right?
I would love it.
As the updates come out, we'll try and keep everyone informed. So I appreciate your time. As we transition, before we go into the questions, I did want to address the group and really just share more on what our take is in Arch on the new lending landscape and a few things that we've seen very consistently. And just share a story of a recent deal that we've helped out with and we were able to fund. And more importantly, to understand if you in the audience have experienced something like this, we can help. Hopefully we can help. And, it seems to be more of a consistent theme with the new landscape that we see. And realistically, we've seen a lot of lenders or borrowers that had a deal due to close in a short time frame with lenders that were already set up, and days before, maybe a week before if you're lucky, that lender canceled their loan last minute. And so we've had a lot of new borrowers that have brought us their deals just in that distress situation, not wanting to lose out on a deal and possibly not having any other direction to go. So I do want to address that. Recently we had someone, it was 2 days before closing, and we were able to help them out. So if you've been in a situation, or if you have any inkling that the lender that you're currently working with might have any issues, I think what's important now to position yourself as a real estate investor is to have lending options. The saying of don't put all your eggs in one basket, I think is very important with the shifting playing field that we have right now. So stay tuned, and hopefully we can help you out if you have a deal that needs funding quickly. One other thing to note is our origination, our process, our application process, we've really scaled down all that we can to make it as quick and easy. And so for those deals that they take 24 hours for, docs to go out and funding to be deployed, it just makes it a whole lot easier on your end. So you're not starting from scratch as far as going through the whole process, which we know can be a real pain for some of the other lenders out there. So with that being said, let's jump into our Q&A. And this question, we've had several questions that were sent in. This is more of a theme question. We saw it come up quite a bit. So I think this would be something that's great to address to the entire panel group. I do want to announce that we had Steve Manzo from Orange Coast Title. He had to end the call a little bit early. So we do have TJ and Steffanie that I want to allow you to provide your response, and we'll have TJ go first. So the question that was sent in is, how do you see the real estate market in the next 6 months? And I think this is an important question. I'm sure quite a few of the audience out there is wondering what is going on, and from each of our industries, I think would be great to give that input. So TJ, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. First of all, thank you, Steffanie, for answering that question. it was ad hoc. That was not part of the plan, but it came to me. So thanks for dealing with my impulsiveness. Yeah, the real estate market in the next 6 months, I suppose if I knew the answer to that, then life would be different. But I guess there's some principles out there that we look at that I can kind of explain that might be helpful for everybody. So the first thing that seems to have been overriding all of our markets for many years is the limited amount of supply of housing in all the markets that we play in, which is, you know, infill areas of California and Colorado and Washington State, and in those markets, it's so hard to build new units that we just see a endless dislocation between supply and demand. And it's almost like no matter what shock happens to the market, if you're in the median part of the market, there's always buyers for it. And I think that the reasons for that are, first of all, obviously the median part of the market is the largest part. In Southern California particularly, but also Northern California, those price points typically are where the houses are similar to each other. So it's really easy to get to a price point. It's easy for buyers and sellers to match each other. And if you're a seller, let's say you're a flipper and you have the best house on the street and it's in the median part of the market, you're going to sell it fast. And that seems to have been true for a long time. And it's also been true over the last couple of months. The other thing that affects that is that really the government does want people to own homes, and they do the best they can to subsidize and support mortgages for people that are earning wages and average wages, and I don't see that that's going to change anytime soon. Mortgage rates are at an all-time low, and I don't see that's going to change anytime soon. And it's hard to believe that the state is going to allow developers to just build more and more units willy-nilly with all the environmental restrictions and code restrictions and don't do this in my backyard restrictions and all that stuff. So even given the fact that the employment is affected severely, even given that, I think that you're going to see a stable market for median home prices. Now, if you're in the luxury market, if you're one of those people that flips luxury houses, you already know that that's more of an art form than a science, and that's something, frankly, that I've tried and I'm no good at. But if you're doing that, I think you need to expect to hold on to the assets quite a bit longer. I don't know that the luxury market is going to be moving very fast in the near future. But I feel when we're underwriting loans, we're looking at, is this right in the sweet spot? Is it infill? Is there limited supply? Are there going to be buyers out there because of the price point? And is it going to be, you know, better than most of the stuff on the market? If that's true, you're going to sell it with multiple offers and you're going to sell it fast. And I don't see that changing in the next 6 months, even given increasing infection rates, which I think are going to continue to go up for a while. I don't think we're going to be out of this situation for quite a long time. We're going to have to live with an elevated level of risk, and we're going to have to accept that, and we're going to have to figure out how to move on. I guess the last comment I have is that there seems to be a trend of people wanting to expand. You know, if you're working from home, do you need an extra bedroom? You know, so I've seen a little bit of that in the news. It's probably too early to really know, especially since the markets we're in are typically single-family markets. So maybe some of the strength we're seeing is because of that, but I'm not at all negative in these markets. So with that, maybe you can circle back to me, but those are my initial thoughts, Mike.
I appreciate it, TJ. And same question for you, Steffanie. And we actually had an opportunity to discuss this just the other day, and it was interesting, your response, which is why I wanted you to address the group with the information that you provided today. So go ahead, Steffanie.
So I'm a little different because I think the unknown is what's super scary for all investors and also even the retail owners. They don't know what they're doing. I have a lot in the retail market trying to just leave the state of California because they're not liking how they're handling the COVID and the stay-at-home orders and the reissuance of everything. So you have a lot of people that are just trying to get the hell out of Dodge to get out of the state as a result of it. So I do think that the market is positive as well. I think even 6 months from now, the market will be positive. But since we don't even know with the evictions, like it's the HEROES Act that just got passed this morning from the House gives another stimulus check, gives unemployment to be extended, gives renters the option of continuing not to pay the rent even though they're getting government money. It's very hard to know what it's like, kind of what TJ said. I think that the government is a big fan of people owning homes. So maybe they're trying to give all this money so they can start buying homes and being into the market. So that's why you need investors now more than ever to start buying the older homes, get them ready, flip them, because people still do not want to buy the older homes that are not conducive to their lifestyle. They don't want to spend the money to fix it up to the standards, and they can't afford new construction. But new construction has not stopped building. I think the only market that might be hurt as a result of COVID is going to be commercial, because a lot of employers are realizing that they don't have to have people work in the office. They can work from home. I think San Francisco commercial market is going to take a huge dive. LinkedIn hasn't been in office. Twitter hasn't been in office. Facebook hasn't been in office. Now they are trying, the company is trying to state to them, like, you have to live within a certain mile radius of the corporation to try to help keep the housing. But who knows if that's going to be a true fact going forward. So I agree with TJ that I'm positive about the market. Everyone that I've talked to thinks if there is going to be a correction or some sort of effect with the influx of properties once the foreclosures can start again, it's going to be a V. So which means there might be a sharp decline in the market, but it'll just go zoom right back up. So you kind of have to continue on where we're at this time, getting the calls, going out, meeting with the people that want to sell their homes, seeing what they want to do. And it's not a bad risk to continue to buy the houses, flip them, and put them back on the market. The retail market hasn't taken a hit, and the interest rates are too low to pass up at this point.
Thank you, Steffanie. I appreciate that. So we have just time for one more question, and this one is actually for Steffanie. We'd like to get your take on this. Does any of the new legislation affect the foreclosure process and commercial or private money loans? And I know you touched on this briefly.
So it's only for consumer foreclosures. So they haven't still ratified to whether they have to be like primary residences to not be foreclosed on. They haven't done any but-fors. Like, what I think that the legislation needs to do and start doing is having exemptions to the overall broad, vague rules. So like, especially with evictions, mom and pop should be exempted from it. You have people that own one home and then one rental. They can't afford, they're getting affected by COVID as well by not only in their one primary residence having to pay that mortgage, and now they just lost the rental income. It's the same thing with foreclosures. I think that they are going to start lobbying the state legislator, the federal, the Congress to create exemptions so that if it's not their primary residence, they can start the notice of default and see if they can go into that. But as of right now, everything is stayed pending for the next 90 days. Well, 4 months after, because it just extended to the end of July. Commercial is the same. It's not just residential, it is commercial. These laws apply to commercial and residential, which doesn't make sense for commercial for the stay-at-home order, but it's for the employers ideally that are paying rent, and they don't want these small businesses to go out.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate the response there. That is going to conclude our meeting. Again, a big thanks to everyone who joined in, and a very big thanks to Steffanie for your time. TJ, thank you as well for being a part of this. With that, we will have a similar webinar, hopefully soon. We'll send out an email with the response and as far as the details to the next event. But we'd like to begin hosting this on a regular basis and try and provide content that is of strong value to you in the real estate market. So thank you everyone for being a part, and we'll see you next time.